Someone who invests a lot less sooner is in much better shape than someone who invests a lot but has only 10 years left. So for the young people out there, you really, really need to get started.
Vince, thanks so much for coming back on our video chat again. It's great to have you back.
My pleasure, Clark. Always great to see you.
Last time we had a chat about all sorts of different things that affect Americans living abroad. But there was one thing in particular that I mentioned that would be great if you would come back and have a chat with us about it. And that was, how much do you need to retire? And I know this is kind of right up your street. So how much does someone need to retire?
Happy to discuss this. Obviously, it's very context dependent and dependent on a person's individual circumstances. But today we're going to look at three scenarios where I'm trying to paint a picture of, say, an average person out there with average amount of assets at a given age, and then how much are they going to need to save in order to get to the retirement that they think they would want. I kind of wanted to start this discussion, though, if you don't mind, just talking about the retirement situation in general for Americans. And probably this is true for most, I think, developed countries around the world, which is there is an impending retirement crisis where most people are nowhere near ready to retire. Okay. And I don't want this to be like all doom and gloom. And this is not like a scare tactic, but the problem is for most people, they're not taking it seriously enough. And so I do want to sort of scare people to action, because most people are a bit too complacent about this issue. And as a case in point, a couple of years ago, I read an article. There was a survey of people in the US aged 55, and half of them had no money in a retirement account. So nothing in a 401k, nothing in an IRA. That does not include equity in a house, which is a big asset for a lot of people. It also didn't include people who have defined benefit pensions with their company. However, they are a minority. But the point is, at age 55, half of them had zero.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
It's very scary. And so it's the question we're trying to answer today is, how much money am I going to need, and how much do I need to be saving today is very, very critical, because again, most people, when we think about our future self, who we are down the road, we actually don't think about that at all. They've done neurological studies to sort of map the brain when people are thinking about themselves down the road. And the part of the brain that gets activated is the same part that gets activated when they think about a complete stranger. So our future self is a stranger to us, and we don't care about that person. And so we're going to have to really automate our care for that person by automating our savings as much as possible, because it's not about waiting until I feel like it, because we're never going to feel like it, most of us.
Maybe some people who are parents might kind of feel like, they want to leave something behind for their kids inheritance-wise. That's often a long way off. That's obviously, we're talking end of the road, but you've got to get there first, right? And hopefully you want to get there in some level of comfort after probably working for many decades.
That's a good thing that you point out there, which is that our kids are still present. We care about them. We want to save for their education and maybe leave something for them. That's more tangible to us than even our future selves in retirement sometimes, So hopefully today, when I go through some of these scenarios, again, it varies obviously based on individual circumstances, but when people see the numbers, I hope that is a splash of cold water to just sort of wake people up.
Vince, if I can ask you, just before we get into looking at some different scenarios and examples, you've mentioned 401k and you mentioned IRA, and that's great. But what about all our Americans living abroad? Like, obviously, some of them are in countries where they might get pension plans or superannuation plans, Kiwi Savers and whatnot. But then some may not be enrolled in those programs. So if they're living outside the United States, what can they do in terms of saving for some sort of retirement fund?
For most people, the savings are going to have to occur outside of an IRA and obviously a 401k, simply because the IRA contributions are too small. And I'm going to assume that most people can save more than the $6,000 a year that you can put into an IRA when you're under 50 7,000 if you're over 50. So, it's not like a 401k where we can put a lot more than that, right? So basically, you're gonna have to open a taxable investment account. And it's not the worst thing in the world, taxable accounts. You can still manage the tax hit in terms of when you reap capital gains, but it's the only option really. And then it's a question of, well, who can I open an account with, right? Globally speaking, probably your two best bets are going to be Charles Schwab or Interactive Brokers, but that's very country specific. Especially if you live in Europe, there's a lot of limitations to what can be done in an account in Europe. But yeah, those two companies do business globally versus a lot of the US companies like Vanguard or Fidelity. They will not open new accounts for people living overseas. They'll let you keep your existing accounts, but you can't open new ones.
So if you haven't left the United States yet, but you're planning to go and live abroad, it's a good idea maybe to open those accounts first, just so you've got them when you need them.
Exactly. So if you have a preference for a certain platform provider like Fidelity, you should open it before you go overseas.
We recommend quite a few people now to Interactive Brokers. Obviously, we don't have any affiliation with them. It's just, we know when we send people there, they usually have a reasonable experience in terms of getting signed up, getting an account. If they've got an address outside of the US, it's obviously they don't have a big problem. So obviously that's an important thing. There are options for people, which is always a good thing. How do we work out what's an appropriate amount to save? Obviously, it's age dependent, I guess. And I guess the other thing is, well, where do you want to retire, right?
Yeah, where you want to retire, because you need to be thinking about, obviously, cost of living. What is the cost of healthcare there? I got a client in Spain who is retired. He actually spends less on insurance in Spain than he would for out-of-pocket expenses on Medicare. So it's not always a bad thing to be retired overseas in terms of healthcare costs. You got to think about long-term care as well, which is not covered by medical insurance anyway. So you need to plan for that. You need to think about currency fluctuations. You need to be thinking about where your family members are and cost of travel and things of that nature.